In this video, I will show you my favorite 10 traps that I have been using to trick my opponents, and you can also use these traps to trick your opponents and win more games. So let's move on to our first trap. After e4, black goes c5. You play knight f3, d6. You go d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4. Black goes knight f6. You play bishop c4, gambiting this pawn. Black takes this pawn and then you go queen to h5, threatening mate in 1. Black goes e6, blocking your bishop. You go bishop b5 check, bishop d7, and then you go knight takes e6. He cannot take with this pawn and he also cannot take with the bishop. So he goes queen a5 check. You play bishop d2, and here white goes knight takes d2, threatening a discovered attack. But this is a big mistake because you can play bishop takes d7 check, which is a counter discovered attack on his queen, and after king takes, you can take his queen, and you are completely winning. Let's move on to our next trap. After e4, e5, knight f3, black goes knight f6. This is the Petrov defense. You play bishop c4, knight takes c4, you play d4, e takes d4, queen takes d4. Now black goes knight d6, attacking the bishop. You castle here, and after black goes knight c6, developing his knight with tempo. You play rook e1 check, knight blocks, and then you go knight to g5. The best move for black is to take this bishop and then continue playing. But here, so many players have gone b6, trying to fiancé shadow this bishop. But this is a big blunder because you can sacrifice your queen, and after c takes d6, you can play bishop takes f7, checkmate. Let's move on to our next trap. After e4, e5, knight c3, you play bishop c4, black goes knight takes c4. Here, don't take this knight because black can play d5, which is a central fork, and black will regain the piece and have a good position. Therefore, here you will play bishop takes f7, and after king takes, you can take this knight, and after black goes knight d6, you can play queen f3 check, and here the only good move for black is king to e8. But here the most common move is king to g8, which is a big mistake because you can play knight to g5, threatening mate in 1. So here you have to take this knight, and after queen d5 check, bishop e6, queen takes e6 is a checkmate. Let's move on to our next trap. After knight f3, d5, you play c4, black goes knight f6, defending the pawn. You play g3, trying to play bishop g2, bishop f5 is a common move here. You play c takes d5, and black recaptures with the knight. And here you go with this tricky e4. You have to take, otherwise you will capture this knight. Therefore, after bishop takes e4, you can play queen a4 check. And after black blocks, you can take this bishop and you are completely winning. Let's move on to our next trap. After e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, you go c3. This is the Ponziani opening. After knight f6, you play d4. And here black goes knight takes e4. You play d5, attacking the knight, knight e7, and here you go knight takes e5. Here the most common move is d6, trying to kick your knight away. But this is a big blunder because you can play bishop to b5 check, and after c6 you go d takes c6, and here, then instead of taking this pawn, black takes your knight. You play c takes b7 check, bishop blocks, and then you queen on the next move. And after queen takes, you can play queen takes d7, checkmate. Now let's see some traps for the black pieces. After d4, d5, c4, you decline with e6, knight c3, knight f6 are common moves. Bishop g5, pinning your knight to the queen. And here we go with this tricky knight d7, and here the best move is e3. But here so many players go with c takes d5, And after you recapture, white takes this pawn, thinking that you cannot recapture because your knight is pinned to the queen. But you shock him with knight takes d5, sacrificing your queen. White can't do much, so he takes your queen, and then you go bishop b4 check. Queen d2 is the only move, and then you can take his queen, and after king takes, you can take his bishop. You are up a piece and completely winning. Let's move on to our next track. After d4 knight f6, c4, you play e5. This is the Budapest gambit. D takes e5, and then you go knight to c4, trying to regain this pawn. Knight f3 defends. Knight c6 puts more pressure on this pawn. White defends with bishop f4, and here you go bishop b4 check. He have to block with this knight, otherwise he will lose a defender to this pawn. Therefore knight bd2. We play queen e7, putting more pressure on this pawn, and here white goes a3, trying to kick your bishop, but you don't care and play knight takes c5. White takes your bishop, but this is a big mistake because you can play knight to d3, which is a smarter checkmate. Let's move on to our next trap. After e4 c6, d4 d5, knight c3, you play d takes e4, white takes, and then you go knight f6. White takes your knight, and you recapture with the e pawn. Bishop c4, developing his bishop. You play queen e7 check. If he blocks with the queen, then it's an equal game. But here, so many players have gone knight to e2, developing his knight and also preparing to castle. But this is a big mistake because you can play bishop b4 check, and after c3, you can take this bishop. You're up a piece and completely winning. Let's move on to our next trap. After e4 c5, knight c3, knight c6, white goes f4. You play g6, knight f3 is a normal move, bishop g7, bishop b5. You play knight d4, hitting the bishop back. Knight takes d4, and you recapture with the pawn. White goes knight to e2, saving his knight. You play e6. Here, the best move is to castle, but the second most common move is d3, which is a big mistake because you can play queen to a5 check, bishop d2, and then you can take this bishop. You are up a piece and completely winning. Now let's move on to our last trap. After e4 e5 f4, you take this pawn. White goes bishop c4. You play d5, striking in the center. Bishop takes, and then you go knight f6, knight c3. You play bishop b4, d3, and then you take this bishop, and after white recaptures, you just castle here. And here white goes queen f3. You play rook to e8, knight e2. Then you go queen h4 check, g3, attacks the queen, and here you play bishop takes c3 check, and after pawn takes, you go with this tricky bishop g4. White goes g takes e4, and then you take this queen, attacking the rook and putting pressure on this knight. The best move for white is castle, and then you can take this knight. You're up a piece and completely winning. Well, if you enjoyed these chess traps, then don't forget to give this video a like, and here are some more amazing chess traps like these. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss more of these videos.